And now I give room for the next speaker, which is Mänd. And she is a senior research fellow at the University of Tallinn. She has previously written on the social history and virtual culture of medieval Livonia, festive culture, history of guilds and confraternities, saints' cults, iconography, interior of Estonian and Latvian churches, poor relief, and the role of women in medieval and early modern societies. So, please.
Well, thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'm a medievalist, but today my paper is not about the Middle Ages, so I'm also thankful for the organizers that they accepted my paper as such. I'm talking about an 18th century antiquarian and illustrator, and about his drawings. By the 18th century, the world had expanded, and for centuries there had been a growing interest in the New World, in discovering and describing the wonders of the New World. But parallelly to that, there was also a growing interest in the antiquities in one's own country. And Søren Abildgaard was one of these guys who collected and copied monuments in Denmark and Sweden, and also in the provinces of Estonia and Livonia. So just a few introductory words. This is supposed to be his self-portrait, so as you see, a nice guy. And he was actually born in Norway, but in his youth he moved to Denmark and to Copenhagen. He entered the university there, but never graduated because of the family problems, many children, and so on. So what's he's most famous for concerning Danish-Estonian relations is his trip in 1754 together with a Danish historian and archivist Jacob Langebæk, and the company was also there was also a Swedish antiquarian in the company. So Langebæk actually was the main organizer of the trip, and he had received a royal grant to collect monuments connected to Danish history. He himself was interested, of course, in the written material, so he was the one who copied the documents, but he realized that works of art and all kind of architectural and topographic information is also very valuable. So he persuaded the king and the academy that he needed a professional illustrator. So that's how Abildgaard was involved. So their grand Baltic voyage, so to say, began in summer of 1754. They departed, I think, from Uppsala, where they had spent the winter, then moved to the Åland Islands, Turku, and other Finnish towns, to St. Petersburg, and from there they entered Estonia and stayed in Narva, Tallinn, Pärnu, then moving on to today's Latvia, Cesis and Riga, and from there to Lithuania, Poland, and northern Germany. Altogether, this Baltic voyage resulted in over 100 of drawings and thousands of copies of documents. There is a quite recent book, a magnificent book about Søren Abildgaard and his drawings, published in 2010 by Paul Grinder Hansen, who works in the National Museum of Denmark. And thankfully, all the images are also freely available in the digital collections of the museum, so you can search there and look at all the images. Yes, well, altogether, over 800 drawings of Abildgaard have been preserved, but the Baltic voyage was well, at least the Estonian part was not so plentiful. So this map, modern map, is mainly for our Danish guests. So they started from Naara, well, came from St. Petersburg, then they didn't visit the town of Rakvere, but on their way to Tallinn, they stopped at the rural parish church of Haljala, where Abildgaard made 2 drawings. Then they moved on to Tallinn. They stayed there for about 2 weeks. Then over to Pärnu, and then to Valmiera, where no drawings were made, but the former Hansa town. And then to Cesis and Riga, and so on. So Abildgaard made altogether 13 drawings in the provinces of Estonia and Livonia, +1. But to discover what was the +1, you have to wait for the last slide. So don't get asleep. So today I'm going to ask very simple questions. What did Abildgaard draw, and why exactly these monuments and not some others? How precise were his drawings, and if he omitted something, then what exactly? A more difficult question is who decided what was relevant? Was it Langebeck as a historian, or was Abildgaard also free in his decisions? And there are, of course, more general questions about the importance of visual sources for history and using historical drawings as a source material for medievalists today. So again, a modern picture showing the border, the modern border with the Russian fortress of Ivangorod and Narva in Estonia. So the first stop was in Narva, and one drawing was made, but as you see from the notes of Abildgaard, he didn't make this drawing from the originals, but copied a drawing which he had received from the Burgomaster Schivelbein in Riga. There is also a letter by Abildgaard in which he explained that he had actually seen this coat of arms on the city gate, and that the roses were much more masterfully carved actually than on this drawing which he copied. So, but no explanation why he didn't draw the originals. So the first drawings produced on spot on their way were actually made in the parish church of Haljala, which you can see here, and the main portal has 2 stone reliefs with coats of arms, but Abildgaard only drew this one. So it's coat of arms of the Wrangel family, and yeah, here you can see how Abildgaard described what he had drawn and when he did it. So really precise documentation. Yeah, that this stone is on the wall of the Haljala church on the right side of the entrance. Yeah. So another drawing which he made was of a grave slab in the church, and Paul Grender Hansen, when he wrote his book about Abildgaard, he didn't cooperate very much with Estonian scholars, because there are, I mean, in several occasions he has commented that this or that stone has no longer been preserved, but actually many of the monuments that Abildgaard drew, they are actually still there, as you can see. And this time it was a grave slab of the Hastver and Taube families, two influential noble families in Estonia, which had strong connections. So why exactly these monuments? There were, of course, I mean, these noble families were present everywhere, not only in Estonia or Livonia, but also in Denmark and Sweden. And here I have just chosen some very famous guys, like field marshals from the Wrangel family. It is interesting, though, that in some cases the connection does not reach back to the Middle Ages, but to the Swedish period, the 17th century. But it was nevertheless the historical knowledge of these families that probably made Abildgaard and Langebeck to decide in favor of these monuments. There were some other medieval and post-medieval monuments in the very church which Abildgaard did not draw. So the relief on the left side on the portal, which belonged to the Mekes or Mex family. And let me go back. And also, which is really strange, that he didn't draw this grave slab, which is of the same Hastver and Taube families, but and much has been preserved in much better condition. So we can only surmise that age mattered, that they were that they preferred older monuments, the medieval monuments, first of all, because Langebeck himself was always in search of medieval documents. But you want to comment?
You just to ask me, why hasn't he taken the inscription on the right side? It seems as if it's very clear to read now.
Yes, it is.
The drawing he has omitted a clear description.
I'll come back to that in a way, yes, but you have very sharp eyes. Indeed, the name is written here very clearly, Hinrik Hastver, but I'll explain in a second. So next stop, Tallinn, and obviously one of the first spots of interest was the house of Saint Knut's guild of the artisans. Everything that has to do with Saint Knut or Saint Canute was of interest to this company. And here Abildgaard has made a drawing of two Doorside stones which framed the entrance, and the relief which was above the portal. These monuments have partly been preserved. So here you can see the house of St. Canute's Guild, how it looked like before the reconstruction works in the 1860s. So nowadays you have this historicist building. And during the reconstruction works, the Doorside stones were demolished, but the upper parts were walled to the back facade of the building. So maybe during your trip or the guided tour on Friday evening, you managed to see this. Yeah.
And we were told that Mänd will show them. So
oh, okay. How did she know? I wonder. But this relief has also been preserved. Here you can see that there are again some differences, like there are flowers in the corners instead of the date and the maker's mark. And also the colors are a little bit different, but this doesn't have to mean anything because the relief was, the polychromy was renewed several times. So it may well be that at Abildgaard's time the colors look like that. So another work of interest was obviously the image of King Knut in the statutes, in the medieval statutes of St. Canute's Guild. And here you can see that the drawing is very, very precise. Like it's very detailed and very precise. It is somewhat surprising that Abildgaard didn't make any drawings up in the cathedral, where several Swedish noblemen have been buried, for instance, and there are magnificent grey monuments of Pontus de la Garde, for instance, or the court marshal Olaf Rüning. So he didn't copy these monuments at all. Instead, he made drawings of some Doorside stones in the lower town, and the connection to Denmark or Sweden is really difficult to ascertain. There is no obvious connection. So here the Doorside stones have been lost, but as you see, Abildgaard has also drawn the year, and he also says that the year was not on the Doorside stones, but of the portal, and there is a fragment, a stone fragment of a portal, where you can see the same date, and it belonged to merchant Hans Pavels, who is known in Estonian history as one of the wardens of St. Olaf's Church. So, but no obvious connection to Denmark or Sweden. There is also a drawing of a pair of Doorside stones where the coat of arms have been unidentified. So I have seen a similar coat of arms on some drawings of Abildgaard. So perhaps they thought that this belonged to a Danish family also, but more likely it belonged to a Burger family here in Tallinn. So I have no idea why did he choose this monument. Well, in this case, there is a connection. Abildgaard has drawn a Doorside stone, one of the two and it belonged to a knight called Henning Passow, who prior to settling in Livonia had been in the service of the Swedish crown. The question is, of course, how did they know about it? But what is more interesting is that Abildgaard drew only some details of the stone and not some others. Already here in the text you can see that with a later hand a year 1501 has been hewn to the stone, but you don't see the date here. Luckily, fragments of these Doorside stones have been preserved, and here you can see that indeed there is this year 1501 hewn later, and there are also some other additions from the 17th century. So the later owner of the house, the town councillor Matthias Porter, had his name and coat of arms and those of his wife Elisabetta Goldberg added to the stones in 1636, but Abildgaard omitted these details from his drawing. Yeah, and Porten also had the name Henning Passow hewn here. Yeah, from the original inscription, only a small detail has been preserved. So altogether, well, sorry for my drawing skills. So this is what Abildgaard saw, and this is what he decided to draw. So it indicates that we have to be careful with historical drawings. They may represent the reality, but they don't have to. Maybe he wanted to perpetuate the coat of arms and the inscription of the man who had relations to at least Sweden, but the 17th century guys were not important to this company. Yeah, just very briefly, a post-medieval drawing of a seal, and here you can see the explanation why they copied the seal, that this general was born in Bornholm, and therefore an interesting guy for Langebeck's purposes. The next stop was in a former Hansa town of Pärnu, and there in St. Nicholas's Church, Abildgaard made a drawing of one grave slab, which you can see on the left side, and there is the monument itself has been destroyed, but there is also another drawing by Johann Christoph Brotze, who began to collect evidence on Livonian monuments 30, 40 years after Abildgaard's trip. And here again you can see some differences. Brotze's drawing is somewhat more precise. For instance, Abildgaard has left the circles empty, but Brotze has sketched the symbols of the four evangelists. Also, you can see that in the inscription, the name of the town of Pärnu was most likely abbreviated, like here, but Abildgaard has written it out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So. Yeah, just to give you an example Abildgaard's drawings of the how precise he was, or what did he omit. So this is a good example from Grinder Hansen's book. You can see that he didn't like inscriptions very much. So he has basically omitted all the inscriptions, but also some carved details. So again, you have to be very critical about the accuracy of the historical drawings. Now briefly to today's Latvia, where he copied a grave slab of Dirk Lode, another famous noble family which had branches everywhere. Then he drew a detail of this great monument. He didn't obviously know whose monument it was, so this is a kind of maybe a spontaneous decision that this is a bishop and it must have been an important person, but obviously they did not know that it belonged to Andrzej Nidecki. So yeah, and in the Cathedral of Riga, he made a drawing of a very, very famous monument and very significant monument, at least concerning Livonian history. And here again there is a comment on the webpage that it has not been preserved, which is partly true, because only some details have been preserved from the Middle Ages, like this part and also the figure of the bishop, but this upper part is a 19th century reconstruction based on historical drawings. And again, there is another drawing by Johann Christoph Rotze, which is a little bit more detailed than this one. So, what do these drawings tell us? First of all, it is a testimony to the appreciation of one's own culture, monuments that are connected to Danish history and also Swedish history. It was also evident that they preferred, that Abildgaard preferred, and also Langebeck, they preferred grave monuments and heraldic images. They didn't draw buildings or as it was also evident, these are not photographic images. So, and as historical sources, they have to be treated with the same kind of source criticism than text, for instance. Concerning Estonian art history, they are, of course, very valuable, these drawings, especially for monuments that have been destroyed or damaged or worn since the time of Abildgaard. But most of all, they are witnesses of the 18th century antiquarian mentality and ambitions, what was important in their eyes and what was worth drawing and describing and what not. And I promised you +1. Abildgaard, so to say, began his career in the service of a Danish nobleman who collected butterflies. So he made a drawing of a butterfly in Tallinn. Thank you.
there any questions? Comments?
I have a
Yeah.
question about this collection. How sure we are that these were all the pictures? How well preserved the collection is? Maybe there are some eventual losses.
This is the this is exactly the question that bothered me as well, and I sent an email to Paul Grinner Hansen about it, but he hasn't
Great.
replied. But I'm pretty sure that this is not all, and I know. I mean, in his book, well, his main attention is on Denmark and Sweden, of course, but he has published some pages where there are only sketches. So he made sketches on the road, and when they returned to Denmark, then he made proper drawings. So there could have been many more sketches than the real drawings. What Grinner Hansen also wrote is that there was an intention of publishing all these drawings in the 18th century, that they were supposed to be engraved in copper, but it was never realized. Yeah, and Langebeck, well, I think one of his major works was the compilation of the Scriptores Rerum Danicarum Medievi, but he also didn't manage to finish it during his lifetime. So there are good plans, but they don't always realize. But what I like very much is, like, you get a research grant from the Danish king to travel in nice places.
But not the Dutch.
Well, yeah, this is something that we do when we go to foreign archives. Instead of painful process of making a drawing, we have cameras at our disposal.
Thank you also for showing these examples where you have another one making a drawing of the same thing and how different they are. Because I've been looking at some of these drawings for the tombstones in the church in Mänd where I'm living, and half of them are still there, the other half have disappeared. And where you can compare. What I have found are actually that in that case he was relatively precise. There are some of the abbreviations that he has either omissed or written out in a wrong way, but they are relatively okay. But then you don't have, for the tombstones that are lost, you don't have alternatives to Abildgaard from the church of Mänd. So it's really interesting to see here.
I was wondering whether he himself was able to read these old inscriptions or not. So maybe he omitted, like the tombstone that you pointed out first, where he had omitted the name. So maybe he only reconstructed the parts that he was able to read, and then...
But those I have seen, he has actually been relatively okay in reading it. Yeah, but
maybe when Langebeck was present and was helping him with the inscriptions, then they could reconstruct it. But if he was on his own, then although an artist should be able to copy an inscription even when you cannot read it, just to copy the shape.
Or maybe he was bad at, like in the sketch, maybe he just, I don't know, something happened to his sketch in this piece, or he drew it badly in the sketch, but we don't know.
You mean
a
cup of
Well,
coffee?
something, yeah, it happens.
Okay.
I mean, we're talking about, I think that's on the floor, so it's quite possible that it was covered by something. There was a bench or something on top of it. That's why this part is... He couldn't see it. That was the most logical explanation.
That's possible.
But wouldn't they have removed, unless the benches are fixed in place, they could have removed that?
could have.
Well, it's in the
Detail
it's in the chancel, so it's not a place for benches, but perhaps a pulpit or something.
I was
Yes, the
thinking,
pulpit was, I think, 1 meter, 2 meter in this direction.
Mm.
Might have been part of it.
Yeah, that's a great idea actually.
anything else?
I actually had one. It's a silly question in the sense because, but how well were they received by the administration of the Baltic provinces of the Russian Empire? Was it possible that they were not allowed to go to some places because they were from a foreign, maybe possibly dangerous kingdom?
I have no idea. I know that both Langebeck and Brockman held diaries, so there is huge material to be studied, but I of course haven't read their diaries, so I don't know about it. What I was also interested in to find out who assisted them, because they must have had some local assistants or helpers to guide them here and there. Because, for instance, why else go to the Church of Haljala instead of Rakvere, for instance? Or, I don't know. So someone must have told them that, okay, there is something for your purposes.
You had a number of copies of documents from Langebeck. Were that documents they copied during that tour, or this trip here?
Oh, yes. I mean, Langebeck made numerous copies, but if you ask me if they are still extant or where.
No, but I mean, the number you gave, that were copies from this tour here, and not all the other things he copied at home.
No.
Because that's a
This
lot-
was
that's a lot of
these 3,000, 4,000 documents. This was the number for the entire voyage, also in Sweden, and so not in the world. No. And actually, well, the majority of documents and the drawings were made in Sweden. So there are very few from Finland and from our region.
Yes, I think the lady said something interesting about sketches. I suppose he made sketches. I mean, these are not the drawings he made on spot. Is that correct? And do we then have the sketches preserved in any cases? Because that
No.
would mean that we have this what we see now is actually not what he was drawing on the spot. And since he was traveling around, I mean, he couldn't stay very long and very thoroughly, and that might account for some of the discrepancies we can see. If
Well,
we see
no sketches have been preserved as far as I know.
Okay.
And here, well, I don't know, he has written that he has drawn this in August, well, and then this
Yeah, but this
it's not a big monument, so this is something that you can easily do in a short period of time. I mean, what is there to draw?
It is his copy of his sketch. In Erik Dahlberg's case, for example, I mean, we have the sketches he made on spot preserved, and that sometimes you can see there are quite large discrepancies to the final versions. So I think it would be very interesting to see if there are any sketches preserved.
As far as I know, the sketches have been preserved for some Swedish and Danish monuments, but not of not those. But I have to ask Paul Greiner Hansen again about it.
Because I think it's quite likely that he was unable to really see what he had sketched actually sometimes.
I know that sometimes the Swedish guy who was in the company, Nils Brockman, he tried to make drawings, he tried to copy Abildgaard's drawings for his own purpose. Because he also wanted to have this material, but since Abildgaard's drawings were supposed to end up in the Danish archive, so Brockman made tried to copy, but he was not very good.
But he copied the sketches, or did he copy the final versions?
I honestly don't remember.
That's quite interesting. As I said, in Erik Dahlberg's case, we can compare them, and there are differences.
Okay, any more? Yes.
I have one loosely connected question with this material. So, how much do we know about this Henning Basso, whose coat of arms was here? This Danish client in Tallinn.
Well, depends what kind of information are you looking for. Well, there are some documents published in Liefest und Kurländisches Urkundenbuch. Also, I mean, there the connection to Sweden is obvious. And about his activity in Tallinn, there is much more information, of course, because he was married to a daughter of Tallinn town councillor, Diderik Naschert. And also Henning Basso's last will has been preserved, where he asked to be buried under the same grave slab as his father-in-law. He had 2 children. He also owned a manor, the Lagedi Manor.
And he was also the guy about whom I was talking to you yesterday in Kolga Manor.
Ah.
So he had a quarrel with Johan Soye, and then Johan Soye was wounded, and Soye in turn wounded the servant of Basso, who was killed then.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And all this happened because Basso was drunk and threw Soye with a chair.
So the conclusion is that quite a lot is known about it.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, I think we should have maybe applause.